For 6 long years, she had steadfastly refused every invitation to debate him. But tonight, the sanctuary of silence was no longer an option. The Roon Araj Auditorium at Columbia University typically accommodates exactly 800 souls. Yet, on this crisp Thursday evening in late October, the count had swelled to 812. This minor violation of capacity occurred because the fire marshal, in a moment of pragmatic foresight, realized that barring entry to the fervent supporters of a sitting United States Congresswoman would incite a disturbance far greater than the hazard of a few supplementary folding chairs. The marquee for the evening advertised a high-minded dialogue titled "The Future of the American Economy," featuring Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ben Shapiro, a dignified academic label that barely veiled the reality that two ideological adversaries who had orbited one another on social media for over half a decade were finally colliding in shared physical space with live amplification. The genesis of this confrontation was deceptively straightforward, stemming from a commitment AOC made 3 months prior to host a Columbia University town hall focused on economic policy. Since her congressional district bordered the campus, the political optics were impeccable, and her initial Instagram announcement garnered 40,000 affirmative reactions in less than 60 minutes. However, the university administration, seizing a moment of intellectual ambition they would later oscillate between celebrating and deeply regretting, decided to invite Shapiro to provide a counterweight to her perspective. The Congresswoman's team frantically attempted to rescind her participation, but a stern missive from Columbia's provost, which leaked to the press within hours, reminded her that she had executed a binding contract and that the institution held the free exchange of ideas as a non-negotiable value. She found herself ensnared in a diplomatic deadlock, and every observer in the political sphere understood that there was no graceful exit. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez arrived first, emerging from a sleek black Suburban at the side entrance, flanked by a phalanx of 3 aides and a communications director who was already broadcasting their transit from the vehicle to the venue in real time. She was dressed in a pristine white blazer layered over a deep burgundy blouse, accessorized with gold hoop earrings, and wearing the grimly determined expression of a woman who had spent a fortnight preparing for an interaction she had desperately hoped to avoid. The auditorium welcomed her with the thunderous adulation that auditoriums packed with progressive Columbia students always reserve for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. A standing ovation so raucous it seemed to vibrate the overhead lighting fixtures. She offered a practiced wave and a radiant smile, pointing specifically to a figure in the 3rd row with that peculiar familiarity politicians employ to feign recognition of strangers in a crowd. She navigated to her designated seat on the left side of the stage, settling behind a table equipped with a microphone, a pristine water bottle, and a leather portfolio sufficiently thick to hold either comprehensive policy notes or the manuscript of a novella. Shapiro made his entrance exactly 11 minutes later, walking unassumingly through the main public doors alone, carrying absolutely no briefcase, no manila folders, no hydration, and 0 written notes. He was clad in a tailored dark suit with a crisp white shirt and no tie, crowned by a yarmulke that rested on his head with the quiet inevitability of a man who wears it daily and has never once contemplated its absence. Standing 5 feet and 9 inches on a generous measurement, the vastness of the auditorium stage conspired to diminish his physical stature, as large platforms often do to those who do not command them with sweeping theatrical gestures. The applause that met his arrival was a charitable mixture of sounds, as a cluster of college Republicans in the rear right quadrant clapped with vigorous enthusiasm, while a smattering of law students who subscribed to his podcast offered a polite, restrained acknowledgement. The remainder of the room generated the ambiguous noise of 800 people vacillating between respectful silence and open hostility, eventually settling on a low-frequency murmur that resembled the hum of a large kitchen appliance harboring a grudge. Shapiro appeared completely oblivious to the temperature of the room, or if he did perceive it, he simply did not care. He strode purposefully to his table on the right side of the stage, took his seat, adjusted the angle of his microphone, and surveyed the audience with the calm, laser-focused expression of a man who had been anticipating this specific moment for 2,190 days. The moderator, Dr. Sarah Chen, the esteemed chair of Columbia's Economics Department, introduced both participants with the carefully studied neutrality of someone who had been explicitly instructed by the administration to appear aggressively nonpartisan. She outlined the evening structure, which included opening statements, followed by a moderated discussion and audience inquiries, before turning the floor over to AOC. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood up immediately. Despite the format allowing for seated remarks, because she understood a fundamental truth about performance art that most politicians learn far too late in their careers. You simply cannot shift paradigms or change minds while sitting down. So she thanked Columbia with a voice that carried the practiced warmth of 1,000 previous town halls. "I am here tonight because I believe in a concept that is fundamentally simple," she began, establishing her rhythm early. "I believe that the wealthiest nation in the history of human civilization possesses the means to care for its own people without exception. I believe that healthcare is a fundamental human right rather than a luxury privilege. I believe that education should not be a sentence to bankruptcy. And I believe the climate crisis is an existential reality that demands a moral obligation to act." She paused for effect, letting the gravity of her words settle before adding, "I was a bartender for 4 years before I stood on the floor of Congress, so I know what it means to work a double shift and still fail to make rent. Just as I know the fear of praying a tooth doesn't break because the dentist is unaffordable. I didn't read about struggle in a white paper. I lived it." The audience erupted instantly, the standing ovation returning with renewed vigor as AOC took her seat with the impeccable timing of a performer who knows exactly how long to let the applause crest before it crashes. Shapiro waited patiently for the room to return to equilibrium, remaining seated but leaning into his microphone with the tense posture of a man about to deliver a verdict. "Congresswoman," he started, his voice cutting through the remaining ambient noise, "I have been attempting to have this specific conversation with you for 6 years." The room went instantly quiet, a heavy silence that was distinct from mere lack of noise, representing the sudden focus of intense attention. "In 2018, I offered $10,000 to your campaign or a charity of your choice for just 1 hour of your time. A request you characterized as catcalling, comparing a solicitation for a policy debate to sexual harassment on a street corner." He paused, not to build drama, but to ensure the precision of his next point landed correctly. "So I am incredibly pleased we have upgraded from catcalling to a formal town hall, and I promise to be on my absolute best behavior." A ripple of laughter moved through the auditorium, unexpected and involuntary, the type of genuine reaction that escapes before one's political identity can suppress it. Even a few of the staunchly progressive students in the front rows found themselves covering their mouths to hide their amusement, while Shapiro's expression remained completely unchanged. "I am not here tonight to destroy anyone, as the internet already has quite enough destruction content. Rather, I am here to ask just one solitary question." He looked directly at AOC and asked, "Does your math actually work?" He allowed the question to hang in the air for a moment, letting the simplicity of it breathe. "Because if we are going to fundamentally reshape the American economy and alter how 330 million people live, work, and pay their taxes, the numbers strictly have to add up. Feelings are undeniably important. I have them, you have them, everyone in this room has them. But feelings do not balance federal budgets. Feelings do not fund government programs. And feelings do not put food on family tables. He sat back in his chair, signaling the opening of his argument. Can the richest country in the history of human civilization afford to take care of its people? Let us find out with math. The room did not realize it yet, but they had just witnessed the final moment that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would be in control of the conversation. Dr. Chen directed the first topic toward energy and climate policy, which was a polite academic euphemism for the Green New Deal, avoiding the specific buzzwords that would cause half the room to cheer and the other half to groan. Shapiro spoke first this time, stating, "I want to start by doing something that might surprise you, which is that I am going to agree with the Congresswoman." AOC's eyebrows lifted a fraction of an inch, a gesture that in the language of political optics is the equivalent of a shocked double-take. "Climate change is real," Shapiro asserted, "and human activity undeniably contributes to it. I am not going to sit here and debate the existence of climate change because that is not the purpose of tonight." He leaned forward, sharpening his focus. What tonight is about is whether the Green New Deal, your signature policy that you introduced in 2019 and have campaigned on for 6 years, can actually solve the problem. He continued, "Because wanting to fix something and being capable of fixing it are two entirely different propositions. I want to dunk a basketball, but that does not mean I possess the ability to do so." A chuckle emerged from the audience at the image of Shapiro, standing 5'9", making a height joke at his own expense. It was a disarming tactic, calculated specifically to lower defenses before he pivoted to the hard data. "Let's look at the numbers, and not my numbers, not Fox News numbers, and certainly not Daily Wire numbers. The American Action Forum, a center-right policy institute. I will grant you that bias, but one staffed by actual credentialed economists estimated the Green New Deal would cost between $51 trillion and $93 trillion over 10 years. He held up his hands in a gesture of preemptive peace. "Now I know exactly what you are going to say, that it is a right-wing think tank, so fine. Let us use the absolute lowest end of $51 trillion and be incredibly generous." He began to tick off facts on his fingers the way other people crack their knuckles, quickly and effortlessly. The total gross domestic product of the United States, everything this country produces in a year, every hamburger sold, every car built, every surgery performed, is approximately $28 trillion. Your plan, at its absolute cheapest estimate, costs almost twice what the entire American economy produces in a single year. He continued his rapid-fire dissection. Federal revenue, meaning all the taxes the government collects from every person and every corporation in America, is about $4.4 trillion per year. Your plan costs more than 10 full years of total federal revenue, and that represents revenue that is already spoken for, paying for the military, Social Security, Medicare, roads, schools, and everything else the government currently does. He paused, not for a long time since Shapiro did not do long pauses, but just enough for the magnitude of the numbers to register. Now, here is the fun part. If you taxed every single billionaire in America at 100%, not a higher rate, but 100%, taking every dollar they possess, you would collect approximately $4.5 trillion. You know what that astronomical sum covers? It covers about 5 to 8% of your plan, and then there are no more billionaires because they are broke. So what do you do in year 2? AOC had been waiting for a tactical opening, and she seized it immediately. You are using grossly inflated estimates from a conservative think tank to then demand I provide mine, she countered. Shapiro replied without raising his voice. You introduced this plan in 2019. It is now 2025, giving you 6 years. What is your cost estimate, Congresswoman, according to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? The auditorium fell quiet in a way that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with intense curiosity, as 800 people leaned forward a half-inch, waiting for a specific number. AOC did not have one, so she pivoted. The cost of inaction, she began, is far higher. That is not a number, Shapiro interrupted flatly. That is a bumper sticker. I asked you how much your plan costs, and surely after 6 years, someone on your massive staff owns a calculator. The cost will depend on the specific implementation timeline, she said, but Shapiro cut in again. And you don't know. You have been selling this plan to the American people for 6 years, and you simply do not know what it costs, Shapiro stated with brutal finality. Congresswoman, if I walked into a car dealership and asked the price of a vehicle, and the salesman told me the cost of not buying this car is much higher, I would leave the dealership and I would be right to do so. He shifted his weight forward, pressing the advantage. But it gets better because your original Green New Deal resolution, the one posted on your official website with your name and logo, included a line about providing economic security for all who are unable or unwilling to work. Unwilling, not unable. AOC's expression tightened visibly as she retorted, "That was a draft document that was released prematurely by a staffer." "It was on your website," Shapiro reminded her, "under your name and with your official congressional seal. If my producer accidentally posted a document on the Daily Wire claiming we support abolishing the Second Amendment, I wouldn't call it a premature draft. I would call it a firing offense, and the document would still be a matter of record." He turned his attention to the audience, ignoring AOC to address the students directly. "Here is what I want you to understand. I am not arguing against clean energy or environmental protection. I am arguing against a plan that has no cost estimate, no feasible funding mechanism, and included in its original form the promise of paying people who simply do not want to work." His voice dropped half a register to a serious warning tone. "And the people who get hurt by plans like this aren't the people on this stage. The Congresswoman makes $174,000 a year, and I do fine. So we will be okay. The people who get hurt are working families whose energy bills double when you try to eliminate fossil fuels in a decade, the small business owners who cannot absorb new regulations, and the factory workers whose jobs disappear." He looked back at AOC. "You talk about the working class constantly and brand yourself as their champion, but your policies would devastate them, not in theory, but in practice. Ask Germany, which tried an aggressive green energy transition and saw electricity prices triple. Ask Sri Lanka, which tried to go fully organic overnight and triggered a food crisis that collapsed the government. The road to economic hell is paved with good intentions, Congresswoman, and the Green New Deal isn't even paved. It is a trail of Instagram posts leading into a forest with no map." AOC's communications director in the front row was typing furiously on her phone, though whether she was crafting a rebuttal or updating her resume was unclear. "But the Green New Deal is just the beginning," Shapiro said, moving the debate forward. "Let's talk about what happens when slogans meet math." Dr. Chen introduced the topic of tax policy and income inequality, a subject Shapiro received the way a fastball pitcher receives a lob during batting practice, with restrained enthusiasm and very little effort. In 2021, Shapiro began, the Congresswoman attended the Met Gala. For those unfamiliar, the Met Gala is an annual fundraiser in New York City where the wealthiest people in America pay $35,000 per ticket to dress up in costumes and take photographs of each other. He paused for a beat. The congresswoman wore a white gown with the words "Tax the Rich" written in red on the back, a dress designed by Aurora James, who at the time owed approximately $13,000 in unpaid taxes. He let that detail land with the weight of a physical blow. So a congresswoman attended a party for the ultra-wealthy, wearing a dress made by a woman who doesn't pay her taxes, and the dress said, "Tax the Rich." And the House Ethics Committee, just this past July, found that she violated House rules by accepting gifts she didn't properly pay for, requiring her to pay an additional $3,000 in fair market value. Shapiro looked at the audience with an expression of theatrical bewilderment. "Congresswoman, I couldn't write satire this good. If I pitched this as a Saturday Night Live sketch, Lorne Michaels would reject it for being too on the nose." Laughter rippled through the auditorium, louder than before, crossing political lines because comedy is bipartisan when the setup is sufficiently absurd. AOC leaned into her microphone to defend herself. "I used that platform to bring a message about economic inequality to the people who benefit most from it." "That dress started a national conversation about you," Shapiro retorted, "not about tax policy or income inequality, but about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at the Met Gala. You didn't start a policy discussion, you started a news cycle. And that cycle ended when the next celebrity wore something weird approximately 15 minutes later." He shifted gears, the sarcasm receding by 1 degree to be replaced by the focused intensity of a man who spent his formative years at Harvard Law, learning to construct arguments the way engineers construct bridges. But let's talk about the actual policy of "Tax the Rich," which is a great slogan. 3 syllables, fits on a dress, fits on a bumper sticker, fits on a tweet. But the question is, does it fit on a spreadsheet? He started counting on his fingers again. "You have proposed a 70% marginal tax rate on income over $10 million. If implemented, that would generate approximately $72 billion per year in additional revenue. Sounds like a lot, but it is not. The federal deficit, which is the gap between what the government spends and what it collects, is approximately $1.7 trillion. He held up 4 fingers to emphasize the point. 72 billion covers about 4% of that gap. That is your 70% tax rate, 4% of the whole problem. Now let's go bigger and tax every billionaire in America at 100%. Take everything. Homes, stocks, cars, yachts, absolutely everything. You would collect about $4.5 trillion one time, because after you take everything, there is nothing left to take. And since federal spending is $6.2 trillion per year, you have funded the government for approximately 9 months. Then what? He turned to AOC. "This is where I genuinely want your answer, not your slogan, not tax the rich, but the math. You need $3.2 trillion per year for Medicare for all alone. So where does it come from?" AOC responded with practiced fluency. "We redirect military spending, close corporate tax loopholes, and implement a financial transactions tax." "Let's add it up," Shapiro said, counting on his fingers the way a teacher counts for a student who insists that 2 + 2 = 5. Military spending is $886 billion. So even if you cut it in half, and good luck getting that through Congress, that is $443 billion. Corporate tax loopholes, close every single one, and you might get to $600 billion total in corporate revenue. Financial transactions tax, maybe $200 billion on an optimistic day. He added them up aloud. 443 plus 600 plus 200 equals 1.2 trillion. You need 3.2 trillion for healthcare alone, So you are $2 trillion short, and we haven't even started on free college, guaranteed jobs, or the Green New Deal. His voice was moving faster now, the way it always did when the numbers were on his side and the logical structure was airtight. Where does the money come from? Each word landed like a gavel strike. The answer is the middle class. It always comes from the middle class, because there aren't enough rich people, and there have never been enough rich people. Every country that has tried to build a social safety net the size of what you are proposing has funded it with a broad-based tax on working people. Ask Scandinavia. Sweden's top marginal rate kicks in at about $60,000. $60,000. That is not taxing the rich, Congresswoman. That is taxing the waitress. AOC's prepared responses were running out, visible in the way her hands moved to reach for the leather portfolio, pulling it closer as if the answers she needed were inside it rather than inside her. Other countries managed to provide universal health care and education, she started to say. Name one, Shapiro challenged. Name one country with 330 million people, an $11 trillion military commitment to global security, and the level of entitlement spending we already have that also provides free health care, free college, guaranteed jobs, and zero carbon emissions. He waited. Name one. I have time. The silence lasted 4 seconds, which in debate terms is a lifetime. 4 seconds is enough time for 800 people to reach the same conclusion simultaneously. She can't, and you can't, Shapiro said quietly, because it doesn't exist, and the countries that tried versions of it, Venezuela, Cuba, the Soviet Union, aren't exactly vacation destinations. He leaned back, signaling a transition. But policy is hard and numbers are cold, so let's talk about something warmer. Let's talk about honesty. Shapiro's tone shifted. The machine gun delivery didn't slow, but the content changed texture as he moved from policy to character, from numbers to narrative. I want to show you a pattern, he said, turning to the audience rather than to AOC. Not a mistake, not a single incident, but a pattern. He began with the border. In 2018, the Congresswoman traveled to a detention facility in Tornillo, Texas, where photographers captured images of her hands gripping a chain-link fence, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by what she was witnessing inside. He paused to let the image recall itself in everyone's mind. Those photographs went viral, shared millions of times, and they became iconic, helping to define her public image as a compassionate fighter for immigrant rights. But other photographs from the same event, taken by the same photographers at the same location from different angles, showed something the viral images did not. From the wider angle, you could see that the Congresswoman was standing at a fence along an access road, and the facility was not visible from where she was standing. He held up both hands. Was she upset about immigration policy? I believe she was. Were children being detained in conditions that deserved scrutiny? Absolutely. Am I saying her emotions weren't real? No. His hands came down emphatically. I am saying the staging was deliberate. There is a difference between feeling something and producing something, between genuine grief and a photo opportunity. And the difference matters because if you are performing compassion instead of practicing it, the people you claim to care about aren't your cause. They are your content. AOC's voice cut through the air. I was genuinely devastated by what was happening to those children. I believe you, Shapiro said, but you chose the angle, you chose the fence, and you chose the tears through the chain-link composition. You didn't stumble upon an emotional moment. You directed one. He moved swiftly to the next data point. January 6, 2021, the Capitol breach. A terrible day, which I said so at the time, and I will say it now. What happened at the Capitol was wrong, destructive, and the people responsible should be prosecuted, no qualifications. The auditorium stirred, as Shapiro condemning January 6th was not the script several hundred progressive students had prepared for that evening. The Congresswoman went on Instagram Live and described what she called a near-death experience, telling her millions of followers that she feared for her life, that she was hiding in her office, that she heard pounding on the door, and that she believed she was going to die. He paused again. She was in the Cannon office building, which is across the street from the Capitol. A separate building connected by tunnels, yes, but a separate structure. The Cannon building was evacuated. That is real, and the fear she felt may have been real. I am not inside her head. But her colleague, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who was in the same building on the same floor, called the account exaggerated because there is a difference between "I was in a building that was evacuated as a precaution" and "I had a near-death experience." One of those is a factual description, the other is an Instagram narrative. He began building the pattern, laying bricks one on top of another the way a mason builds a wall. Border photo, staged for maximum emotional impact. January 6th, narrated for maximum dramatic effect. Met Gala, costumed for maximum social media engagement. Instagram Lives, where she cooks mac and cheese and talks about policy in her kitchen. Produced for maximum parasocial connection. He turned to AOC. Congresswoman, you are the most talented political performer of your generation, and I mean that as a genuine compliment. You understand media, branding, and emotional storytelling better than anyone in Congress, possibly better than anyone in American politics since Ronald Reagan. The compliment landed strangely, too sincere to be mockery, yet too pointed to be flattery. But performance is not governance. Instagram followers are not legislation, and viral moments are not policy. And crying on camera, no matter how real the tears, does not feed a single hungry child. AOC leaned forward, and for the first time that evening, her voice carried heat that wasn't rehearsed. You sit behind a microphone every day and criticize people who actually do things. You have never run for office. You have never written a bill. And you have never had a constituent call you at 2 a.m. because their mother needs insulin. You talk. That's all you do. The audience roared, as this was the AOC they had come to see. Fiery, direct, and fighting back. Shapiro waited for the roar to fade, not interrupting it, but letting it run its full course the way you let a wave exhaust itself before stepping back onto the sand. You are right that I have never run for office, he said. I am a commentator, I talk for a living, and I don't pretend otherwise. He leaned forward. But since you brought up doing things, what have you done in 6 years in Congress? What major piece of legislation with your name on it has been signed into law? The question was delivered without malice, almost gently, which made it worse. You have introduced the Green New Deal, which received 0 yes votes in the Senate. 0. Not a single member of your own party voted for it. You have proposed Medicare for all, which has never reached the floor. You co-sponsored a stock trading ban, which, and I will come back to this, I actually support. He spread his hands wide. In 6 years, you have accumulated 8.5 million followers on Twitter, having one of the largest social media presences of any politician in America. You have appeared on magazine covers, late-night shows, and documentary films. His voice dropped. And your major legislative accomplishment is a stock trading ban that hasn't passed yet. He looked at the audience. 8.5 million followers, 0 major bills signed into law. If you ran a business with that ratio of marketing to product, you would be bankrupt. AOC's staffers in the front row had stopped typing, and one of them was staring at the floor. "But I have been hard on you," Shapiro said, "and I want to be fair, so let me give you credit for something real." What happened next was not in anyone's script. The college Republicans in the back row had been building toward a sustained cheer, the kind of rolling tribal applause that sounds less like agreement and more like a football chant, while the progressive students were quiet, deflated, scrolling through their phones for counter-arguments. The moderate middle, the political science majors, the economics students, the kids who came because their professors offered extra credit, were leaning forward in their chairs with the expression of people watching something they hadn't expected to be this interesting. And then Shapiro said something that stopped every person in the room. "I want to say something that might surprise everyone here. Congresswoman, you are right about the stock trading ban." The college Republicans froze mid-clap. The progressive students looked up from their phones. AOC turned her head toward Shapiro with the wary expression of a woman who suspects a trap but can't yet see where it is hidden. "Members of Congress should not be permitted to trade individual stocks while in office," Shapiro continued. "Period. Full stop. No exceptions. You co-sponsored the Restore Trust in Congress Act, and I support that bill. I have said so on my show, and I have written about it. Nancy Pelosi is wrong on this issue, and your own party's leadership was wrong to resist it for years." He looked at the audience. "See, I can say a Democrat is right, and it doesn't cause physical pain. I didn't burst into flames, so try it sometime. Next time a Republican proposes something reasonable, just say, 'Yeah, that's a good idea,' and I promise the earth won't swallow you." Scattered, confused laughter broke out, as the auditorium didn't know what to do with a Ben Shapiro who was agreeing with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It was like watching a cat befriend a bird. Technically possible, but deeply suspicious, and almost certainly temporary. "The reason I can agree with you on stocks," Shapiro continued, and here his voice shifted from conciliatory to surgical, "is that the stock trading ban is based on facts, evidence, and logic. You identified a real problem: members of Congress trading stocks based on information the public doesn't have, and you proposed a real, workable solution. No fantasies, no trillion-dollar price tags, no promises of economic security for people unwilling to work. Just, here is a corruption problem. Here is a law that fixes it." He turned to her. "And that is what frustrates me about you, Congresswoman, because the stock trading ban proves you can do this. You can identify problems, propose practical solutions, and build bipartisan support. You have the talent, you have the platform, and you have the communication skills that most politicians would trade their careers for." His voice softened, not much, but enough for the room to notice. "And instead of using those skills to build practical, evidence-based policy, you use them to sell fantasies. The Green New Deal, Medicare for all funded by taxing a handful of billionaires, guaranteed jobs for everyone, free everything for everyone. The one time you relied on facts instead of feelings, you got it right, which makes it worse, not better. Because it means you know the difference. You know what real policy looks like, and you choose the fantasy anyway, because fantasies get more Instagram likes than spreadsheets." AOC tried to use the opening. "So you acknowledge that we agree on more than you'd like to admit?" "On one thing," Shapiro said, "out of dozens of proposals, if you went 1 for 40 in baseball, you would be cut from a little league team. But in Congress, you'd be the future of the Democratic Party." The laugh that came from the audience was the biggest of the night, coming from everywhere: left, right, center, back row, front row. The involuntary laugh of people who recognize a perfectly constructed joke regardless of whether they want to. AOC didn't laugh. Her jaw tightened. She reached for her water bottle, took a deliberate sip, and set it down with more force than the gesture required. "Which brings me," Shapiro said, and his voice changed again, dropping the sarcasm the way a surgeon drops a used scalpel into a tray, "to what this is really about." The auditorium felt the shift before it heard it. Something in Shapiro's posture changed. The forward lean, the predatory posture of a debater searching for openings, softened into something else. He sat back in his chair, his hands, which had been moving constantly for 4 chapters, counting, gesturing, punctuating, went still. They rested on the table, fingers loosely interlaced, and didn't move again for several minutes. When he spoke, the velocity that had defined every word he'd said that evening was gone, and in its place was something the audience had never heard from Ben Shapiro, because he had spent a career making sure they never would. Vulnerability. "I want to tell you something personal," he said, "and I need to be honest. I am not great at personal. I am better at facts and arguments and being sarcastic on the internet. I have built a career on being the fastest talker in the room. So bear with me while I slow down." The room went still. Not quiet, but still. The difference is important, as quiet is the absence of noise, while stillness is the presence of attention. "I am an Orthodox Jew. I wear this yarmulke every day, and I keep Shabbat. Every Friday night my phone goes off, my computer goes off, and I sit at a table with my wife and my children, and we light candles and eat dinner together. No Twitter, no podcasts, no debate clips, just family." He looked down at his hands. "My wife is a doctor. She went to medical school, which means she spent 4 years learning, 3 years in residency, and more years than she will admit in fellowship. She works hours that would break most people. She comes home exhausted, and she still sits down and helps our kids with their homework every night." His voice was doing something it had never done on his podcast, in his lectures, or in any of the hundreds of debate clips that had been viewed billions of times across the internet. It was trembling, not much, like a bridge trembling under heavy traffic, structurally sound, but carrying more weight than usual. "When you say tax the rich, Congresswoman, you aren't talking about Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos has accountants, he has lawyers, he has offshore structures, and charitable trusts, and holding companies. He will be fine. He will always be fine. You are talking about my wife. You are talking about the doctor who works 80 hours a week and earns enough to live in an expensive city, put her kids in a decent school, pay her student loans, which, by the way, she is still paying, and save a little for retirement. That is the rich you are taxing." He looked up. "You are talking about the small business owner in the Bronx, your district, the guy who took out a second mortgage to open a bodega, who works from 5 in the morning until 10 at night, who employs 4 people and barely breaks even. You are going to raise his taxes, increase his regulatory burden, and double his energy costs, and then tweet about how you are fighting for the working class. You are talking about the immigrant family who saved for 20 years to buy a laundromat in Queens, who send their kids to public school and hope they will be the first in the family to go to college. Those people aren't rich, Congresswoman. They are trying, and your policies punish them for trying." The auditorium had gone church silent. The college Republicans had stopped clapping. The progressive students had stopped scrolling. And 812 people were watching a man they thought they knew reveal something they had never seen. "My grandparents came to this country with nothing." And his voice cracked on the word nothing. It was a small crack, a hairline fracture in a wall of marble. But in the absolute stillness of that auditorium, 800 people heard it. They survived things I will not describe in this room, because some horrors deserve more than a debate talking point. They came to America. They didn't speak the language. They had no money, no connections, no safety net. They worked in factories. They worked in shops. They lived in a small apartment, and they sent their children to school. And 2 generations later, their grandson graduated from Harvard Law School. He paused. Not because of a government program, not because of a Green New Deal, not because some politician promised them free everything. Because America, this flawed, messy, imperfect country, gave them something no government program can provide: the freedom to build something with their own hands. He turned to AOC, and the sarcasm was gone. The debate tactics were gone. The rapid-fire delivery was gone. What remained was a man speaking from a place that no amount of rhetorical training can manufacture. Your vision, democratic socialism, doesn't get out of people's way. It gets in their way. More regulation, more taxes, more government programs, more committees deciding how much energy you can use, what car you can drive, what stove you can cook on, more dependency, more control. And the people it hurts aren't the billionaires at your Met Gala. It is the people trying to become unpoor, the people on the first rung of the ladder who need the ladder to stay where it is, not be redesigned by a committee in Washington. His voice steadied. When you promise people free everything, free health care, free college, free housing, guaranteed jobs, you aren't liberating them. You are teaching them that they can't do it themselves, that they need the government to survive, that without Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's programs, they are helpless. He shook his head slowly. That is not compassion. That is a cage with nice wallpaper. He looked at her one last time in this chapter. You know this, Congresswoman. You are from the Bronx. You have seen what dependency does. You have seen the housing projects that were supposed to lift people up and instead trapped them for generations. You have seen the welfare programs that were supposed to be temporary and became permanent. You have seen it, and yet you want more of it, not because it works. We have 60 years of evidence that it doesn't, but because it sounds compassionate, because it photographs well, because it goes viral. He sat back. Facts don't care about your feelings, Congresswoman, but more importantly, your feelings don't pay anyone's rent. The room was silent for 7 full seconds after he stopped speaking. 7 seconds in which no one clapped, no one booed, and no one moved. 7 seconds in which 812 people sat with the particular discomfort of having heard something they couldn't dismiss as partisan performance because they had watched the performance fall away, and what was left underneath was harder to argue with than any statistic. Dr. Chen broke the silence by calling for the final segment, her voice neutral, but her eyes betraying that she too was affected. AOC stood up, not the way she had stood at the beginning of the evening. The politician's stand, the practiced rise, the podium-ready posture of a woman who had spent 6 years learning how to command a room. This was different. This was a woman who had been hit and was choosing to hit back. And the choice to stand was not theatrical, but instinctive, the way a boxer gets off the stool when the bell rings for the final round. "You want to talk about personal," she said, and her voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before, the edge of someone who is done being careful. "Let me tell you about personal." The auditorium shifted. This was the AOC they had come to see. 4 years before I was a congresswoman, I was standing behind a bar in Manhattan pouring drinks for men in suits who made more money in a bonus than I made in a year. I worked doubles. I took the subway home at 2 in the morning. I had student loan debt I couldn't see the end of. My father died of cancer when I was in college, and my family almost lost our home because the medical bills were so high that my mother had to work 3 jobs. Her voice didn't crack. It hardened. I didn't have a Harvard degree. I didn't have a podcast. I didn't have a platform. I had a pair of black non-slip shoes and a hope that someday the system might work for people like me. She pointed at Shapiro. You sit there with your Harvard law education and your media empire and your comfortable life, and you lecture me about the working class. I was the working class. I didn't read about it in a textbook or analyze it in a think tank. I lived it. I lived in it. I lived through it. The audience erupted, the standing ovation coming fast and loud, led by the progressive students who had been waiting all evening for this moment. Even some of the moderates stood, the sound filling the auditorium like a wave, and carrying with it all the accumulated tension of the evening, the frustration, the defensiveness, and the 2 hours of watching their champion be pressed into a corner. AOC continued over the applause. You know what it's like to skip a meal so you can make rent? You know what it's like to choose between a doctor's visit and a phone bill? You know what it's like to watch your mother cry at the kitchen table because she doesn't know how she is going to keep the lights on? She leaned into the microphone. That is why I fight for these policies, not because of Instagram, not because of Twitter followers, but because somewhere in this city right now, there is a 23-year-old bartender working a double shift and praying her tooth doesn't break, and she deserves better than a podcast host telling her the math doesn't work. The applause crashed again, louder, and AOC sat down with the fierce satisfaction of a fighter who has landed a clean combination. Shapiro did not move during any of it. He did not interrupt the applause. He did not shift in his chair. He did not reach for water or check his notes because he had no notes to check. He sat perfectly still with the patience of a man who has been in enough debates to know that the most dangerous moment for an opponent is right after their strongest punch, because that is when they think they have won, and that is when they stop guarding. The applause faded, and Dr. Chen looked at Shapiro. Congresswoman, he said, everything you just said is true. The room blinked metaphorically. You worked hard, you struggled, you overcame. You went from a bar in Manhattan to the United States Congress. Your father died too young, and your family nearly lost everything. Those are real experiences, real pain, real strength. He nodded, not the quick, dismissive nod of a debater conceding a point to set up a counterattack, but a genuine nod of respect from one human being to another. But here is my question. The room went quiet in a way that was different from all the other silences of the evening. This silence had weight. This silence had teeth. You went from bartender to congresswoman, and you did it in the United States of America. In the free market economy, under the constitutional system, you want to fundamentally restructure. He spoke slowly, each sentence acting as its own paragraph. You didn't need the Green New Deal to make that journey. You didn't need democratic socialism. You didn't need Medicare for all, or a guaranteed government job, or economic security for people unwilling to work. You needed opportunity, and America, this imperfect, capitalist, free market America, gave it to you. The silence deepened until you could hear the ventilation system. So my question is this: why are you trying to dismantle the system that made your story possible? AOC opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Why are you trying to replace the ladder you climbed with an escalator designed by bureaucrats? Why are you telling the next 23-year-old bartender that she can't do what you did? That she needs the government to do it for her? He leaned forward. You, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are the single best argument against your own policies. You are living, breathing proof that free markets, individual liberty, and limited government create more opportunity than any socialist program ever designed on any chalkboard in any faculty lounge at any university in the history of the world. Your story doesn't support democratic socialism. Your story refutes it. Every chapter of your life, the struggle, the work, the risk, the victory, happened not because the government gave you something, but because America gave you the freedom to earn it yourself. The trap was perfect, not because it was unfair, but because it was true. AOC's greatest strength, her personal narrative, the bartender to Congresswoman story she had told 1,000 times on 1,000 stages, had been turned with surgical precision into the most devastating argument against her ideology. And the worst part, the part that would keep her awake at 3 o'clock in the morning for weeks, was that she couldn't refute it without denying her own life. "You are not the future of the Democratic Party, Congresswoman," Shapiro said quietly. "You are the future of the American story. You are proof that it works. All of it. The freedom, the risk, the opportunity, the imperfect, messy, beautiful system that took a bartender and made her a congresswoman. But only if you stop trying to replace that system with one that has never worked anywhere it has been tried." Dr. Chen called time. The auditorium responded not with the unified roar of a crowd that agrees, but with the fractured, complicated sound of 800 people processing something they hadn't expected to feel. The college Republicans stood and clapped, while a section of progressive students sat in silence, not hostile but thoughtful, the particular silence of young people who have heard something they need to think about before they decide what they believe. A woman in the middle section, a graduate student in a "Nevertheless, She Persisted" t-shirt, was clapping slowly with an expression on her face that suggested the clapping was involuntary and she wasn't entirely sure who she was clapping for. AOC gathered her portfolio. She stood. She shook Dr. Chen's hand. She turned to Shapiro and, after a pause that lasted exactly long enough for every camera in the room to capture it, extended her hand to him as well. He shook it firmly, briefly, without performance. She walked off the stage without looking back. Her staffers closed around her like a formation, and they disappeared through the side exit into the October night where a black Suburban was already waiting with the engine running. Shapiro sat at the table for a moment after she left, looking at the empty chair across from him, at the abandoned water bottle, at the leather portfolio she'd left behind. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked off the stage through the main exit, past 800 people who watched him go, and into a hallway where no one was waiting for him because he had come alone. The clip hit 50 million views before midnight. Not the whole debate, as the internet doesn't have the patience for 4 hours of policy discussion. The clip, the 1 minute and 42-second sequence that began with "You went from bartender to congresswoman" and ended with "Stop trying to replace that system with one that has never worked anywhere it has been tried," became the focal point. By Friday morning, it was the most shared political video in the country. By Saturday, it had been translated into 14 languages, and by Sunday, the think pieces had arrived. A blizzard of analysis came from every direction, each one claiming to have identified the definitive takeaway from the Shapiro-AOC debate, and each one disagreeing with all the others. Fox News ran the debate as a triumph, CNN ran it as a spectacle, and MSNBC's panel spent an uncomfortable segment arguing about whether Shapiro had been condescending before a guest. A former Obama speechwriter quietly noted that condescending and correct are not mutually exclusive, and suggested they should probably address the math. The panel moved on quickly. The New York Times published a fact check the following Wednesday, stating that the Green New Deal cost estimates Shapiro cited were in the range of credible projections, the article concluded. The taxation math was substantially accurate. The Met Gala ethics finding was a matter of public record. and the assessment of AOC's legislative record was reductive, but not inaccurate. It was the kind of fact-check that technically found no falsehoods, but clearly wished it had. AOC posted an Instagram response later that evening, 19 minutes long, attracting 2.3 million views. She was in her apartment, sitting at her kitchen counter, speaking directly into her phone camera the way she always did. No makeup, no script, no staffers. It was powerful. It was authentic. It was everything her supporters loved about her. It did not address the math. It did not explain how the Green New Deal would be funded. It did not reconcile the 70% tax rate with the deficit. And it did not answer the question about her legislative record. It addressed the feeling of the debate, the frustration, the sense of being attacked, and the emotional toll of being told your math doesn't work by a man who talks faster than anyone should be allowed to talk. For her audience, that was enough. But for the audience that doesn't live on Instagram, the truck drivers and accountants and small business owners and retired school teachers who watched the clips on YouTube or Facebook or heard about it from their kids, the unanswered questions hung in the air. They hung there quietly, persistently, like a bill that is past due and getting harder to ignore. Shapiro gave no victory speeches, doing instead what he always did after significant public events. He recorded the next day's podcast. 2 hours as usual, he spent the first 20 minutes on the debate, offered his assessment with his characteristic blend of analysis and self-deprecation. I think the Congresswoman is more talented than I am. I just happen to have the numbers on my side, which is an unfair advantage in a debate about numbers. And then moved on to the day's news because, for Ben Shapiro, the debate was not a culmination. It was a Tuesday. The interview that went viral wasn't the one on his podcast, but a 30-second phone clip recorded by a Daily Wire producer the following morning, catching Shapiro as he walked his children to school. "How do you think the debate went?" the producer asked. Shapiro, holding a backpack in one hand and his daughter's hand in the other, glanced at the camera and said, "I think she's smart, and I think she's wrong, and those aren't contradictory. Some of the smartest people I know are wrong about important things. The hope is that the conversation moves the needle, not for her. She's locked in, but for the people watching who haven't made up their minds yet." "What do you say to people who think you were too hard on her?" the producer asked. Shapiro stopped walking as his daughter tugged at his hand, impatient with the delay. "I don't think asking for a cost estimate is being hard on someone. I think it's the minimum. If you're going to ask the American people to restructure their economy, you owe them a number." "She doesn't have one, and that's not my fault." He resumed walking, but the producer, sensing one more moment, called after him, "Did you win?" Shapiro didn't turn around. "Nobody wins a debate," he said over his shoulder, his daughter pulling him toward the crosswalk. "You just hope the truth does." That Friday evening, the Shapiro household observed Shabbat as it always did. The phones were turned off at sundown, the laptops closed, the podcasts, the tweets, the debate clips, the 50 million views, all of it receded behind a wall of candlelight and silence and the smell of challah bread. His wife asked how his week was, and he said it was long. She asked about the debate, which she hadn't watched because she had been at the hospital delivering someone's baby, which was, she pointed out, a more productive use of a Thursday evening. He laughed. His daughter, who was 7 and understood politics the way 7-year-olds understand earthquakes, she knew they happened, and they were loud, asked what the debate was about. "Math," Shapiro said. It was about math. She asked who won. He looked at his wife, then at his daughter, then at the candles which were doing what candles do on Friday nights in Orthodox Jewish homes around the world. Burning slowly, casting warm shadows on the walls, measuring out the hours of a day of rest in a world that rarely rests. "Nobody wins a debate," he said. "You just hope the truth does." His daughter considered this for a moment. "That's not a real answer," she said. "No," Shapiro agreed. "It's not." She went back to her soup, he went back to his, and the candles burned. Outside, New York City hummed with its inexhaustible, indifferent energy. 8 million people living their lives, paying their bills, arguing about politics, hoping their teeth didn't break. The debate was already fading from the news cycle, as something else would replace it by Monday, because something always does. But somewhere in the Bronx, a 23-year-old bartender with student loans and sore feet and a dream she hadn't told anyone about yet was closing down her bar for the night. She had watched clips of the debate on her phone during her break. She wasn't sure who had won, and she wasn't sure it mattered. But she was thinking about the question. The one about the ladder and the escalator. The one about whether the system that let a bartender become a congresswoman was worth preserving or replacing. She didn't have an answer yet, but she was thinking about it. And in America, that is how everything starts.